and welcome. My name is Ryan O'Rourke, and in today's demonstration I'm going to show you how to paint a very warm evening light coming through a tree and forested area. Now, before we begin, I'd like to note that I've broken this tutorial down into a myriad of very simple steps, and I did this to ensure that even newcomers and beginners could follow along and work confidently through the tutorial, crafting and rendering out exactly what they envision. Now, also, before we begin, I'd like to quickly note that the first quarter of this video, the painting itself, it's going to look fairly messy, and I did that intentionally because trees and forests, they are innately very organic, and they have a plethora of little idiosyncrasies within them. They have various textures, and it seems kind of random and messy initially. But without them, you kind of end up with something kind of like a clip art. And so I included it because I felt that it was imperative to keep what was really special about a forest in this tree area exactly what it was. And that was all this miniature detail. Now we are going to clean it up at the end. However, just recognize the first quarter is going to be a little messy. And I also did this for a second reason, and that being, I really wanted to ensure that everyone coming into this video recognized that painting is a process, and you don't have to be incredibly terrified of putting paint on that canvas. That you can do so, and with time and effort, you can render exactly what you want, regardless of how many mistakes you make, regardless of how messy it gets. If you put the time and effort in to understanding it and just working through it, you can create absolutely anything you want, and it'll turn out wonderful. So with all of that in mind, let's get into the tutorial. Thank you. We are simply going to begin by blocking in both the top and the bottom of the grass and tree area. We are going to use a very dark pigment. You can either use black if you're a beginner, or you can mix a very dark pigment with whatever color you intend to make both the grass and the trees. Now, I'm using black here simply because it's quick, it's easy, and it's just a tutorial. However, black doesn't really have as much depth as a lot of mixed color, and so if avoidable, I would advise that. Now we are going to begin by blocking in different trees, and we're using the same color that we use both at the top and the bottom, and we're just kind of connecting them. Now, this is an area that's going to be completely repainted over, but this is a time where we can kind of get an idea of how many trees we want in this area, what way and position they're going to be. So don't worry about getting each tree perfect, because we're going to paint over the majority of it. This is just a good time to recognize how many you want and how wide you want each tree to be. Now, once we are satisfied with the trees, we are going to begin working on the light itself, what will be shining through the trees, the grass, and the forest. So what I'm doing, I'm picking a dark pigment of whatever color the light will be. It might be a blue, or in this case, it might be an orange. The idea here, much like the trees, is just to get an idea of what we're doing. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be very messy because we're going to do a myriad of other layers on top of it. So this is just, again, to get the idea of what you're doing, the colors you're working with, and to get you comfortable working into the painting. We can start moving outwards. So I'm taking that very orange and I'm dabbing it downwards in a vertical direction and upwards in a vertical direction, extending the light, because we want the light to come out through the forest and through the trees. So that'll create a gradient going from, say, a green of the trees onto the orange of the light. So here we're just kind of extending it, trying to figure out where we want the light and get an idea of it. A lot of the preliminary parts of this painting are more of just getting an idea of how you want it, so you can rearrange it later, so you don't get stuck initially and have to restart at whatever point. Once we've extended our primary pigment outwards, we can begin by thickening it, because in that first initial layer, a lot of it is going to be very see-through, it's not very opaque, right? And we can fix that by taking colors like white and adding that in. So I'm putting it in the middle and I'm dragging it both up and down in between each tree. Now, this is imperative because it's going to thicken the paint. Now, as you can see, I wasn't fully satisfied with how opaque my color was. And so I decided to go in with more of an orange again and covering the white. I'm adding yet another layer. I'm ensuring that that canvas is not showing through. And you can see that we're starting to lose the trees. We want to lose the trees at some point, but we're just going to have a very reminiscent feel of them in the background. For our 7th step, what we're going to do, we're going to take that white again, place it in the middle, and then we're dragging it both up and down vertically. We are recreating that gradient and we're doing it in between all of those trees. We're doing it in between the trees because it'll give it more of a stylized look rather than a graphic design look, and it'll look more like a painting and a little more realistic later on. This is just something that will help us layer and create very different movements. Once we've covered the majority of the middle of the trees, we're going to take whatever color we used for the top and the bottom, in my case a black, and start doing minimal cross-hatching with the brush, which means we're doing a myriad of very small strokes, left and right, going down in different diagonal positions, connecting the black to the orange. And what we're doing here, we're still working on creating a gradient from that black to that orange to a yellow to the white. And this is a very messy way of doing it, but you want it to be messy here because trees and forests, they aren't perfect. They have little idiosyncrasies, and this is going to be one of them. This is, imagine it like a cluster of leaves. You are just creating a gradient through shapes, recognizable shapes in forests. Now, the contrast between the cross-hatched clusters of shapes and leaves, it's fairly stark against the orange. So I'm taking an orange wash, it's very watered down, there's a lot of water in the pigment, and I'm just washing around it. Now this is also further pronouncing the fact that there's a white in the middle and an orange on the outside. We are just making that contrast even larger, and at the same time we are creating that proper gradient from the black to the orange and so the white. 10. For our 10th step, we are taking a mix of our initial pigment, in my case an orange, and white. We're mixing them together and we are extending that orange upwards onto the black. We don't want any black at the end. It will all be either a mixture of green and orange and white and yellow. But this is just the way of beginning that series. And what we're doing, we're making sure that it's still the brightest in the middle and it's going to move out to a dark and then slight bright at the top and bottom as well. So we're kind of creating planes of color. I am doing this through a tapping effect with a round brush. The idea here is that it's not going to look perfect, it's not going to be done in strokes, and so you kind of imply more forestly shapes. So I kind of look at it like all of these little speckles and dots are more trees, and they're rounded, so they're kind of in the shape of clusters of leaves and branches and all of that. So a lot of it at this point is simply implication of what the forest will be. Once I'm satisfied with the light in the middle and the gradient going upwards onto the black or dark pigment, I'm going back into the light and I want to start putting in what kind of implies a tree. So I'm taking a very light watered down orange and I'm putting those tree lines that we did initially with our dark pigment back on top of the white. And so this is going to represent very small trees in the distance. You want to make sure that you're using a very small brush so that the strokes aren't very wide, so that you know that the trees in the background are quite small. Upon placing a large variety of different trees, I'm going to take a slightly darker color, perhaps a brown with a white here, and I'm putting it on top of trees that are more in the foreground. The larger the tree, that means the closer it will be. And with that, you want to ensure that they have a lot more color. So the trees in the background are going to be a whitish orange. We're leaving those alone. but as we get closer, we're adding slightly more color, we're darkening it a little bit, and we're even widening some of them. Now, 14 is more of a continuation of 13, where we're actually just widening trees where we want them to be more in the foreground and in the forefront. And we're doing that with a very dark brown, maybe a little bit of black, or whatever color we were using both at the top and the bottom of the light. Now, here, it's imperative to recognize where the trees are ending and starting. You can have them kind of fade off into the top and the bottom, or you can have them go directly off the canvas. I like to do a mixture of it, and that way you kind of have more of a sense of depth. You want some of them to end in the start of the dark pigment. You want some of it to go completely off the canvas. The ones that go completely off the canvas are normally the trees that are closest to you. The ones that stop in the forest are normally much farther away. We want to imply that there are more trees in this forest without actually having to paint more trees, because you don't want to cover up all of the white light. So what we're doing here is simply getting a very dark pigment, perhaps a brown and a black together, and we're starting within the gradient between the orange and the black. So I'm just taking that and I'm dragging it downwards into the light, and I'm kind of lifting my brush off at the end, ensuring that I don't actually go into the white, but it gets a little bit less opaque as I go down. The same rule applies from the bottom of the grass. I'm adding more trees, so I'm taking the brush, I'm going upwards, and I'm slowly lifting that brush off. Perhaps it has a little bit of water on it. And this way, we are creating a gradient from that dark brown to nothingness within the white. So here, we're simply trying to imply that the light is so bright that it's taken over these trees, and you can no longer see them. You can only see the tops and the bottoms where the light isn't. 16. Now that we have all of the trees in the positioning that we want to start incorporating the light onto them. They are being affected by this light. And so we're going to begin by taking a stark white, and I'm just outlining the sides of all of the trees. I'm doing this very carefully with a very small brush. I'm using a little bit of water so it doesn't get stuck, and I'm just following the outline of all of the trees. At some points, perhaps I'm blending it slightly into the tree, however that's rare, and the whole idea here is just that both sides of the tree are receiving a grand amount of light and it is brightening them. This will also ensure that they look much more three-dimensional and that they don't simply look like silhouettes. If you want to really make it three-dimensional, you can take a brown or a gray and mix that in between the black and the white, so make it more round and it'll give it an organic cylinder-like shape. Now that we have the trees and the light the way we want, we need to start building the area around it, which means both the leaves and the grass. So I'm simply beginning here with the grass on a fan brush. And you don't necessarily need to use a fan brush. A fan brush is just a way of making things go much more quickly. You can take a very small brush and just dab in each piece of grass, or you can cut a brush like I have in a prior tutorial. If you're interested in that, I'll put a link in the description. But the idea here is we're just putting in very small pieces of grass. They're not large blades, they're in the distance, and we are using a paint color, a pigment, which is the same as the orange. So if you're using blue, then I recommend using blue. But the idea here is that the light is reflecting down onto the grass, and so it is the same color. Now that I have the general faraway grass finished, I want to start adding slight small strokes within the grass, and I'm doing that with a cut brush. Again, if you do not have one, or a rake brush, then I will leave a link in the tutorial to it in the description, and you can learn there. But essentially, I'm just creating a bunch of strokes of grass. You can do this again with a very small brush. It'll just take a lot longer. And I'm using a mixture here now of green and the color of the light, so green and orange. So I'm trying to make the grass look very orange in the background, and as you get closer, it's becoming slightly more green and yellow. But again, I'm not getting crazy with the strokes, they are very small. and I've watered the brush down a little bit so that they are smooth. Okay, now that I have the grass in place, I have it going from orange to green. However, I want to personify that. I want that to be much more showy. So what I'm doing, I'm taking orange paint and I'm making it very watery, so it's almost like a glaze. And I'm just going in around the grass and around the trees at the bottom, blending the orange paint out from the orange light down to the green. I'm trying to include less and less paint as I get to the bottom of the green, just further creating a gradient of color, showing that that light is being cast and shone through the grass and eventually dissipating. For step 20. Now I'm going to begin on the water, and as you can see, I put blue. Now I did this to show you and remind you that water is not always blue. Water is the color and the reflection of its surrounding area. And my surrounding area is actually green and orange. So I'm covering up all of this blue, because it shouldn't be blue, with a black, with a very dark color, with the pigment that generally the area will be. And you see that the green grass, the original pigment I used for that was black. So I'm starting with the black here because I want a solid reflection of whatever's on top. So when you paint water, don't just paint blue, don't just paint whatever color you initially see it or think of it as, because water is really a mirror image of its surroundings. Now, step 21 isn't really a step, it was just me deciding that I wanted to extend a lot of the grass. And so I'm doing that with a mixture of green, white, and orange. And I'm just doing tiny little strokes. This time I'm using a single brush and I'm just pulling it out, pulling it down, making the strokes slightly larger because you want the grass to appear larger the closer you are to it. Now we are going to begin on the rocks, and here, because my base color is a black, that's a great color to start with the rocks, or rather just a very dark pigment, because I'm going to take a white, just a plain white, and I'm going to draw the outline of each rock, and then slowly move the white pigment inwards. And it's very watery, that way I can move the paint around a lot, and the white on top of the black is going to create very different grays in between. So I can move it around and just create very different shapes. It's very organic. And if perhaps you add too much white, then you have a finger. And remember finger painting in grade 1 or 2. That was actually a very useful skill that we are going to re-pick up right here, and we're just going to move the paint around with our finger. And so I'm just ensuring that the part of the rock that is closest to the light has a lot of white on it, and then the back of it has a shadow. Because it is three-dimensional, it too is reacting to the light, much like the trees. You want to ensure that the back of all of the rocks is dark, where the front of them is very light. Now, at this point, our water looks like a giant black oil spill, and we don't want that at all. So we're going to start implying that it is water. And I'm doing this with an incredibly small brush, and I'm simply outlining where the water is touching the grass and the rocks. So I'm just going along the edges. I'm not continuing a smooth stream of the brush. I'm moving it around, I'm making it organic. I'm imagining that the water is rippling off different things. And so I'm dragging the paint, I'm lifting the brush off the canvas, I'm putting it back on. It doesn't all have to be connecting. In fact, it's better if it doesn't, because it'll look much more natural. Now, if you recall, we initially began in the water with a blue, when really, I need an orange and I need a green. So I'm going in with a dark red, actually. This is going to look incredibly scary for a couple of seconds, but don't worry, because I'm also going to add in a yellow and I'm adding in a white. Now, I added in the red initially because if you put yellow over black, it'll turn into a green generally, and by putting the red down, I was ensuring that I was getting more of an orange out of the yellow than a green. So I'm adding that, and I'm just doing it all in horizontal strokes in random areas. I don't want it all in one cluster. I want it to look like there are multiple areas of the water, perhaps little waves underneath or things underneath the water. I want it to look like it's a real reflection. It's not completely still and it's not all the same. Upon having a very built up yellow and red and orange, I'm actually going in again with the black and I'm just going over all of it. So I'm creating these greens, I'm creating these oranges, and I'm subduing all of the colors. And I'm doing this because it looks a little too poppy, if you ask me, for the rest of the piece. And this style is fine, however, I want mine to be much more subdued. I want to incorporate more reflection, and I want to incorporate a detail within the water. I don't want it to simply look like moving water or waves. Once I have this very mixed pigment of oranges and yellows and black in the water, I'm actually going to take a real black, something that will stand out against that color, and I'm putting in the reflection of all of the trees. I'm doing this in horizontal little lines going in the direction that I want, and then I'm blending them out to the right and the left, kind of connecting them at certain points, but the whole idea here is that the reflection is in these little waves and dips of water going from right to left or left to right. Now, you'll notice that I have kind of a formation in the water, it's water running. I decided to take that out, so I took it out of the tutorial as well. I will end up painting over it, but here I'm just showing you more that I'm extending the grass. This is just another opportunity to recognize that you never really get stuck if you're always moving outwards from the light, if you're working on the top of the painting or the bottom. And again, I'm just doing it in very small strokes with a green and a white. Now we are simply finishing off all of the reflections. And here I'm doing things for the grass and the rocks because it isn't just the trees that are reflecting within the water. So I'm taking the same general color that I used in the rocks or in the grass and I'm painting it horizontally in the water. I still want it to look like it's reacting to the waves and the ripples, and I'm not exactly copying it. I want it to look skewed. I want it to look slightly surreal. I want it to look like the reflection is moving within the water. So I'm not completing every line, I'm not connecting every color. I want a lot of that water to still show through in the final draft. Now here is the final painting, and you'll notice that I did indeed take out the waterfall area and that there is a reflection of the light itself in the water. Now I thought about including that in this tutorial, however it can be quite a process. And really what it is simply recreating of what we did in the top. So if you go back and you redo all of those steps in the bottom in the water, you will have that reflection. There's also a slightly easier way, and I've already done a tutorial about that. It was actually my first video, and I did that back in college. I look completely ridiculous in the video, but it will solve the issue you are having with the water if that is something you also want to incorporate in your piece. I apologize for not including it in here again, but I just didn't want to extend this tutorial's length by another 10 minutes. I feel like it's already been going on. I hope that the prior 27-ish tips and steps here you did find useful and you can utilize them to create something that you love. And so I wish you the best of luck in your creative endeavors. Stay creative. Well, we have reached the end of the video, and I truly hope you enjoyed and that you've learned something. I hope that you can take even a little piece from this and incorporate it within your art and have some fun with it. Now, all of that being said, if you have any questions regarding the tutorial, or you'd like me to critique your work or go through it with you, please feel free to leave me a comment down below. I'd be very happy to help. And if you want more of an immediate response or you'd like to share a picture of your work, please feel free to add me on Facebook. I have a link in the description of this video, and you can add me there, ask me questions, and I'd be incredibly happy to help you and walk you through whatever you are working on. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, A, I'm very happy. B, please hit that like button and the subscribe button. It really does help me grow this little art community, and I'd be incredibly appreciative if you did. I'm going to release videos weekly, and I just hope you have a wonderful day. So take care, and again, thank you for watching.